So in this video, I want to talk about the Compaq Prolinea 466, and this should apply to other machines in this series. Getting into setup is interesting on these machines. In order to get into setup, you have to have a diagnostic partition on the hard drive of the machine. So if you replaced a hard drive or you've deleted all the partitions to create a DOS partition or whatever, you may need to recreate that diagnostic partition, and we're going to do that on my machine here. So my machine is very similar to this one. It's a Compaq Prolinea 466. It's got a DX2 466 processor, 46DX 66 megahertz processor. I'll say it correctly here. It's got a 2 gigabyte hard drive in it, 20 megs of RAM. It's a decent little machine. So let's jump in here and look at my notes. That's the first thing that we're going to want to look at. So you're going to need the disk images. And I have dropped the images I used up on my Dropbox. So this link will be in the video description, so you can copy it from there. I've already got this open so you can see what we have here. So here's my Dropbox. This is publicly viewable, so anybody can download these. There's two images here. There is a setup image and there's a diagnostic image. And these need to be written to 1.44 megabyte floppies on the Windows 10 machine that I'm on, and then ran on the Prolinea machine in order to create that partition and get the proper files into it. So go ahead and download these wherever you need to and get them extracted to the image files. So for me, I use WinImage. It's I've licensed it quite some time back. I do my floppy imaging with it on my Win 10 machine. I have an external USB 1.44 megabyte 3.5 inch floppy drive on my Win 10 machine. These are inexpensive, $20 or so on Amazon. It plugs into the USB port. It gives you an external 3.5 inch floppy drive, on drive A, which is really useful. So let's proceed along here, and we'll look at this administrative console. So this is the command shell. I've opened it up on the Windows 10 machine. I've run it as administrator, and I've run it as administrator for a reason. WinImage needs to be run as administrator in order to do the things it needs to do to the floppy. So let me go ahead and start WinImage itself, and I'll show you the issue that I have with it, and I will then show you the workaround, the command line workaround I use. So here's WinImage. Let's go ahead and open up one of these disk images. There's the contents of that floppy disk image. Let's go ahead and look at disk. I'm using floppy A, so I want to write floppy A, the contents of what's here, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. I've seen other people talk about this on the forums. I've mucked around here and got this to work a few times, but I honestly don't know what I did, and this time I haven't been able to figure it out. Write disk doesn't work. Extract, inject, it just doesn't work. I can't write a floppy from it. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And instead, you can run WinImage from the command line, and you can give it information. In this case, I'm going to run WinImage from the command line. So there's where it's installed on my machine. I've got the double quotes around this because there's a space in the path. So I want to run WinImage. I'm going to tell it to take this image, and I'm going to tell it to write it to the A floppy. And so we're sitting here in the folder where those images live, where I download them to. And I'm going to do a paste to paste that copied command line in here. Your command line may look different. I didn't get the double quote on the beginning here when I copied. Your command line may look different depending on where WinImage is installed. But let's go ahead and run that. And what we'll see is WinImage open up, as it always does. But I can hear the floppy already being accessed. Drive A is not empty. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and write. I don't know if I can grab this and move it so it's all on camera here. And this is going to take a bit. It's 6% in, but this is writing an image to that external USB floppy drive. That image will be bootable on the target Prolinea machine. So you can boot from the floppy, get you into the setup program. It will go ahead and create the partition on the local hard drive that it needs to, and it will copy all the files from the two floppies into it. And once that partition lives and those files are in it, during boot time, again on the machine, when that block cursor upper right corner of the screen comes up, you hit F10, it'll load setup out of that partition and get you into setup, so you can set hard drive types, enable, disable floppy drives, those kinds of things. So it's a little bit of a pain to do, but it's just the way these things work on these older HP machines. So this is, I'm not even halfway through imaging yet. Other things to note here. I actually have an ask for you guys. I am still looking for a complete list of all the disk images for the HP Compaq series and what they are. There's an FTP site you can jump to that has all of the SP number.exe, in this case, all the downloadable images of all of the drivers and everything for all these old series of machines. But I can't find an index that actually tells me what they are. For the images I'm using, for the SP16085 image, it actually has a text file with it. And that text file talks about products impacted. And if we look here, we find the Prolinea. Well, that's not the series I'm in. My Prolinea is someplace in here. You can see, what I'm doing here potentially applies to a lot of machines. Prolinea 466, it's right there. So this particular disk, in this case, is named SP16085. If I was to download it from the HP website, it would be an executable. Okay, that has finished. The floppy light is still on. I'm going to let the floppy run all the way until the light goes off. I can hear the head still stepping, so it's still being flushed out of the buffer. Now we can do a directory of drive A. And there's what we just wrote onto that disk. So I'm going to eject that disk. And I'm going to put in another blank disk. And I'm going to grab the command line for the other image. Again, I'm going to paste it in down here. And I'm going to run it. And I already heard the floppy access. We'll open this up. And it should start to write here in a second. And there it goes. It's writing. So anyhow, what I was talking about here, where we were, was kind of discussing this information. So there is an FTP site you can download all of these, SP number.exe from. In the older days of DOS, you would download those, or even Windows 3.1, Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows XP, etc. You could download those executables, run them on the local machine, and create disk images from them. Under Windows 10, you can't do that. Basically, you can't run what you can download from the HP site. And so what I have provided here is an actual image of the disk after that process has been done, rather than downloading the executable to create the disk. That executable was ran, it created the disk, and then that disk was imaged to get the two things that are up on the Dropbox site. So that's kind of what's differing here. If you're curious, and you know how to FTP, the information you need is here. You can do this from File Explorer, you can do it from an FTP tool. You can't do Microsoft FTP at the command line because it doesn't support a mode that the HP FTP site has, but if you're familiar with FTP, there's a way to get to that FTP server, and you'll find a pub folder and a bunch of subfolders. And in this subfolder, there'll be the 16085 program, because it's between those numbers, and then this folder will be the 1363. Again, if you don't know what FTP is, I've never dealt with it, you probably want to ignore that or go learn. But we'll come back to what we're actually doing here. So one image is still running. It's getting close to finished up here. Why in the UI I can't kick off the imaging of the floppy, I just don't know. Like I say, I've run into this before, and I've done a lot of head scratching. And I've always found a way around it, and I just don't know what that way is at the moment. A way in the UI here. Thus, the command line method was born. So the disk is still accessing. Let it go ahead and finish. The light will go off here. I'm waiting for the little light on the floppy drive to go off. The light is off. Now we can take a look at what got written to that disk, and you can see there's a whole bunch more stuff. So, we've created two disks here, and in the next part of the video, we will jump in and boot my Prolinea and get that setup partition created. So, in the next part of this video, I want to actually look at getting the partition built on the Prolinea machine. So we can see my HP Prolinea here. It's got a 2 GB hard drive in it, 3.5-inch floppy. There's currently a 5 1/4 inch floppy mounted, although the case doesn't fit together correctly. I did some disk imaging with this machine some time ago. I've got my PS2 keyboard here. We have the floppies we're going to need. I have a set of floppies for DOS install, and I have a set of floppies, that we created on the Windows 10 machine earlier to do that. So let's go ahead and power this thing up. Actually, I'll start here. I'll power it up. I need to move these. There's a sharp edge over there that keeps catching my fingers. So I'll power the machine up. We should see the machine start. It's now looking at memory. I'm going to hit escape to get to the end of the memory test. Get my fingers on F10. Oh, it actually went straight to booting MS-DOS. So this is booting MS-DOS off the hard drive. This is a minimal install. I created 2 additional partitions here just so we'd have something to look at. Let me go ahead and delete again and see if I can get the F10 to come up to attempt to get into the BIOS. Should in that upper right hand corner. I didn't see it again. That's probably because the partition isn't there, is why I'm not seeing that. So let's talk about what we need to do here. I'm going to use the DOS installer. So this is a DOS 622 full install, and I'm going to go ahead and put the floppy in, and I'm going to boot the machine from that floppy. And it'll take it a second here. So it's accessing the floppy. And I'll walk you through the way. This is how I normally do DOS installs anyhow. So if you have anything on the hard drive of the machine that you need to keep, you need to back it up in some way first, because we're going to lose everything that's on that hard drive. We're going to strip it down to a blank drive and rebuild it. So the installer is starting from the floppy. And once we get to this point, I can hit F3 twice and exit back down to the command line on the floppy drive. And I'm going to go ahead and run fdisk here, so fdisk, which is the disk partition utility. And I'm going to go ahead and display the partitions. And we can see that we have a C drive, partition 1, it's the primary DOS. Under status, there's an A, that means it's active, it can be booted from. We have a second partition, partition 2, extended DOS. It's saying you have logical drives in that extended DOS. Do you want to view them? And I'll let it do that. And there's where D and E exist. So we need to remove these partitions in order to install the tools, the setup tools. So I'm going to go ahead and use option 3 to delete partition or logical drive. I like to work backwards from the furthest out partition to the boot partition. So I'm going to say delete logical DOS drives in an extended partition. I'm going to go ahead and tell it I want to get rid of drive E. I have no volume label. If there was a volume label displayed in the upper left hand corner there, you'd need to type it in. I'm going to get rid of it, and that drive is deleted. Now I want to take drive D out. Again, if there was a volume label, you'd need to type it. They are deleted. Now I need to delete partition or logical DOS drive again. And we're going to take out the extended DOS partition, option 2. That is that number 2 partition you see up there. It is now gone. I'm going to do this one more time. Delete partition. We're going to take out the primary DOS partition. It's partition 1. It does not have a volume label. We'll leave it blank, and I want it to go away as well. And if we display partition information now, there are no partitions defined on this drive. We now need to let the machine reboot. So while the machine's rebooting, we'll take a look at these. So these are the 2 floppies that we created earlier on the Win 10 machine using WinImage from the floppy images that we downloaded from, in this case, my Dropbox site. So I'm going to let this go ahead though and start from the DOS installer again. And just double check. So once it comes up with the menu here, we can F3 twice to get out. Fdisk. And if we do option 4, there should be no partitions, and there are no partitions. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the DOS bootable floppy out, and I'm going to put the setup floppy in, which is the image 1363. So let's put that in, boot the machine. That disk is a bootable image. You can see it starting MS-DOS off that setup floppy. I don't have a mouse on the machine, so it's not going to find one, but that's okay. I'm going to pick English. Hard drive does not have a diagnostics partition. It's strongly recommended that you have one. I'm going to go ahead and pick OK because we actually want to create it. I can see it accessing the hard drive as it created the partition. Your system must now be rebooted. Please ensure the diagnostics diskette is inserted properly in drive A. This is the diagnostics disk. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in. And I'm going to hit enter to boot the machine. Escape past the memory test. If you were observant, you may have actually saw the cursor flash up there in the upper right hand corner. For a second, that big block cursor saying, hey, you now have a partition that I could potentially go into for setup. Partition's been performed, your system will reboot, and you may continue. Press enter. So this takes several reboots to get through, at least the one time I've done this previously. I don't remember exactly how many, but we'll just follow the process here. The diagnostic disk is still in the drive. If you watch, there's that cursor flash up there where you could have hit F10 to get into the BIOS. Well, into the diagnostics stuff on the hard drive partition. Like I say, it's an oddball machine. The setup is not in the actual BIOS itself. This should come up at some point and say, we need to copy files. Has been formatted to... The following prompts will ensure that you have the proper diskettes. So it's basically saying we've now formatted that partition we created. You must have both disks. It wants me to insert the setup disk, so I'm taking the diagnostic disk out, putting the setup disk in. You can see now why I labeled these. It now wants me to put the diagnostic disk back in. That's the 16058 or 16085. That was the image we used to create it. We'll put it in. It'll validate we have it, and then it starts to copy files to build that partition, that setup partition that we'll need. So really this just takes a while. It's got a bunch of stuff to copy. But this really is, on these Prolineas at least, how you get into the BIOS in the end. We'll let this keep copying. As I mentioned earlier, I'll mention it again here, I had to delete all the partitions off the hard drive, meaning anything that was installed was lost. If DOS was on it, Windows, games, whatever, that's all gone. We are working against a completely blank hard drive here. If you had stuff you wanted to keep, you need to back that stuff up. And that's outside of the scope of this video to talk about how to do. I've spent a lot of time figuring out how to make this work. A lot of forum posts. I don't know what forum I found those image files on, but I did find links to those on a forum where somebody had basically been able to run the executables, create the floppy images. Let's go ahead and put the setup disk in. So I've got the setup disk here, and it'll copy stuff off of it. And I downloaded them from that forum link, and that was very useful. That's what got this all started. Just let this keep going, doing its thing. So much fun to watch. You probably can't hear the hard drive ticking away as it's copying from it. And still copying. Installation of the diagnostics partition is complete. In the future, you can run the Compaq utilities directly from the hard drive. To do so, press the F10 key at power on when the large block cursor appears in the upper right hand corner of the screen. That should look or sound familiar now. So I'm going to go ahead and exit the utility, and I'm going to restart the machine, and I'm going to get my finger over F10. And when we see that block cursor, or does escape? Actually, there it was. So it's now booting from that partition, from that setup diagnostic partition, and here we are, computer setup, security management. I don't have a mouse attached, so I need to tab around in these forms. It's processor and memory, storage. We could go in here and change the disk types. There's a diskette drive B. If I remove it to put a CD-ROM in the primary drive 2, I should see the CD-ROM drive appear. But here it is. Here's, setup. Pretty cool. So let me get down here. I've tabbed through to exit. There's some diagnostics available as well. Power management, view system information, prepare for service call, create a diagnostics diskette. That will do just what it says. It'll create a bootable diagnostics diskette that you can then run, memory tests and things from. That's outside really the scope of this video. You'd put a floppy in and let it do it, but I'm going to go ahead and hit exit, and I'm going to put the DOS bootable floppy back in the A drive. So when the machine restarts, it'll boot up DOS 622's install. Upper right hand corner of the screen, we should see the block cursor flash here at some point. I'm going to ignore it, and there it is. This is now starting from the floppy in drive A, the DOS 622 setup floppy. This should make a nice little gaming machine. I'll need to get a sound card for it. Got a couple different things in mind for it. So I'm going to go ahead and, in my case, hit F3 here again twice to get out of setup, because I want to manage the disk partitions myself. I don't setup, at least last time I used it, tends to create one mega partition, and I want multiple partitions on the drive. So let's go ahead and display the current partitions, and we'll see a non-DOS partition. That non-DOS partition can only be created against a blank drive. If you have other partitions, it won't create it. I've already tried that. So I want to go ahead and create a DOS partition. I want to create the primary DOS partition. Do you wish to use the maximum available size? No, I do not. I'm going to make this one... Actually, I need to make 4 512 gigabyte drives. 512 megabyte drives. Excuse me. So there is that one. We will probably need to mark it active. Let's go ahead though and move on through here. So we're going to go ahead and create another partition. We're going to create an extended DOS in this case. This I want to occupy the entire rest of the drive, because I will create 3 partitions inside of the extended DOS. This is just how FDisk works. So extended DOS partition is created. There's no logical drives defined. I want to create them. I'm going to do 512 again. It added D. I'm going to do 512 again. It added E, and I'm going to use the rest of the disk for F, 465. And I need these partitions for some software development I plan to do. You can partition however you want to. I'm going to go ahead and set an active partition at the moment so the machine can actually boot from partition 2. So it's asking what partition do you want to make active. If you look at that status column, there's nothing set in there. You just saw it. You should have just seen it change to an A. That says that active means it's a bootable partition. It's actually not at the moment. It won't be until we format it and get an operating system on it. But that just makes sure that the system knows that it will be bootable. Let's go ahead and do a restart. And I'm going to let it boot from the setup floppy again. There's our nice little blinking cursor if we wanted to get into setup. And in this case, I'm actually going to let the DOS installer actually run, and we'll get through the first few screens here to get it actually getting files onto the hard drive. So to set up MS-DOS now, hit enter. Continue and replace your current. This is Drive C is not formatted. Yes, this is correct. Actually, it's acting correctly. I want to go ahead and format that drive C. It saw the non-DOS partition. That's why it said, delete your existing, even though we told it not to. I'm forcing it to use the partitions I manually created outside of setup. So we'll let this just format drive C here. I can tell you on really slow machines with large drives, this could be a long runtime. This is an actual hard drive. There's a physical hard drive mounted upside down under here. An IDE style drive, 2 gigabytes. I don't know who manufactured it. The setup sees it. I don't remember what type it assigned to it. It did actually assign a type number to it. Getting closer, 3/4 of the way through. Like I say, for a machine that I got for $5 or $10 surplus, before it got ground up at a recycle place, I'm pretty happy with this. So, and C is now, it's going to force us to format all 3 of the drives. So I will fast forward here, and I'll see you on the other side of the format. So the drive is just about finished being formatted. This would be the last partition of the 4 I created. I realized here normally I only create the bootable DOS partition, install DOS, then create the extended partitions after, so I can avoid what you just saw happen. But so be it. Date, time, I don't care about at this point. US, US. I'm going to go ahead and put DOS in the C drive in a DOS folder. And really now this just becomes lots of file copying and swapping in the DOS disks as it asks for them. So again, I will fast forward through this and I'll see you at the end. Okay, we're back. 100% of DOS has been installed on the hard drive. Let's go ahead and remove the floppies and see if it's bootable. Hopefully it will be. And I saw the hard drive flash. And we should now see MS-DOS load from hard drive. And there it is. And we have DOS loaded from a hard drive. Sweet. So let's go ahead and restart one more time. And I'll recap quickly. We should see the block cursor in the upper right hand corner of the screen because we have a Diagnostics partition. I'll hit F10 when that flashes, right there. It's starting the machine from that Diagnostics partition. And there it is, computer setup. So, interesting machine that you have to go through all this to actually get set up to work. Is what it is. If we go down and actually look at the storage devices, we didn't look at this earlier, but my primary drive 1 is a Type 65, apparently a 2110 megabytes, and I'm assuming that was, well, there's a configure hard drives. I wonder what that brings up. I'm not going to change anything. Select operating system type. Yeah, I don't want to muck in here. It's been a long time since I've dealt with this kind of mess. I'm going to cancel from there. But there it is. We are in the system. So next thing I'm going to do is get some benchmarking software on here, and I'll get Check It Pro on here and go through all the hardware, and we'll see where we're at. But I think that wraps it up for this video. I hope you found this useful, and if you need to get into setup on your Prolinea, here is a process to do it. We'll talk later.